GMAT all day!
In this video here, we will do another problem, reinforcing our simple inequality expressions involving absolute values. So this should be similar to what we did in the last video. This should be a relatively short video as well, and I believe our prompt is almost identical to the last one. If x is an integer, what is the value of x? So now in this case, instead of having just x under our absolute value sign, we have an expression in each of our statements. Otherwise, this looks pretty similar to our last problem, and there's not much to do other than to move on to our statements from the prompt. And so statement 1 says the absolute value of x plus 2 is less than 3. Now, the fact that we have an expression here doesn't really change much, because before we said this means x is between -3 and 3. So now this is just telling us if I want to get rid of my absolute value bars, x plus 2 is between -3 and 3. And if I want to figure out what this is telling me about just x, I need to subtract 2 from my middle term here. And so with compound inequalities, if you add or subtract from one term, you have to do the same thing to all the terms. So we have to subtract 2 from all of our sides. And that just leaves us with x is less than 1 and greater than -5. This still gives us multiple options for x. If x has to be an integer, x can be what? X can be -4, -3, -2, -1, or 0. So we have 5 options for x, which is enough to say this statement is insufficient. Statement 2 is similar. The absolute value of x minus 2 is less than 3. So now, unlike the previous problem where we had a less than sign in one statement and a greater than sign in the other statement, here we have 2 less than sign. So this is once again another between scenario, except here, not x plus 2, but x minus 2 is between -3 and 3. Now we want to get x by itself in the middle, so we just got to add 2 to each side, which gives us x is between -1 and 5. And remember, we're looking at this statement by itself here, so we still have multiple values for x. So here, if we did the same thing that we did before, we can write out all of those values. So x can be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, which makes this statement insufficient as well. Now, looking at them together, one thing you can do is if you wrote them all out, meaning you wrote out this list of values for x, you can just see what your two lists have in common. Those should be all your values for x. And so here it looks like the only value they have in common is 0. Yeah, so that means we just have a single value that x can be when looking at them together, which tells you together your statements are sufficient. X has to be equal to 0, and C is your answer. Now, alternatively, if you didn't write out these lists of values like we did here, and you just want to combine your inequalities like we did in the previous video, you can do that as well. And so let's write those down here. So we have x is between -5 and 1. And x is between -1 and 5. So to combine these once again, you just have to think about it a little bit. And so if we approach this by just looking at our extremes. So we break our inequalities down into their left side extremes and their right side extremes. So on our left sides, we know x has got to be greater than -5 and greater than a -1. So what is that telling us? That's really just telling us x is greater than -1 because that is the more limiting of our two extremes. In other words, if we plotted this on a number line, we're saying -5 is here and -1 is here. So if x is to the right of -5, but x is also to the right of -1, that's really just telling us x is to the right of -1. And so to combine our inequalities, we know x is greater than -1. And then what about our right side? And so here we know that x is less than 1 and x is also less than 5. And so what is that telling us? That is just telling us that x is less than 1. And on our number line, that means is if x is to the left of 1, it's also to the left of 5. That's really just telling us x is to the left of 1 because in this case, 1 is our more limiting restriction. And so combining our statements gives us this inequality. Oops. X is greater than -1 and x is less than 1. But recall, x has to be an integer. So the only integer between -1 and 1 is 0. You get the same answer that we got here. And so either way, we get an answer of C. So that is it for our super simple absolute value inequalities. In the next video, we will look at another one that I would categorize in the simple absolute value category, but one that involves equations requiring a little bit more algebra.